So to be really honest, this is affecting my enjoyment of the novel. I will be giving some views on the chapter and the book in general, and I will leave the time code below in case you want to skip to that. Hi everyone, this is me and I'm back again with a read-through of Chapter 2 of 魔道祖师 or The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. This is a very long chapter because it contains chapters 2, 3, 4 and 5 from the original serialization. So I will only be doing the equivalent of Chapter 2 today with other videos to follow up subsequently. So let's start. Chapter 2, The Intractable. Wei Wuxian had only just opened his eyes when someone kicked him. A voice thundered in his ears. "Playing dead?" He almost coughed up blood from the kick. His head hit the ground, and with his face turned up, he thought hazily, "You've got nerve, daring to kick me, the patriarch." Wei Wuxian had already lost count of the number of years it'd been since he last heard a live person speak. Never mind such awful caterwauling. He was dizzy, and the cracked voice of a young man was rattling between his ears. "Think for a moment whose land you're living on, whose rice you're eating, and whose money you're spending. So what if I took a few things of yours? They should have been mine in the first place." Soon after, there was the clamoring noise of chests and cabinets alike being ransacked. It was a good moment before Wei Wuxian's eyes could focus. A dim ceiling came into view, as did an unfortunate-looking face with a greedy glare. That face was spraying spittle all over him. "And you dare go tattle on me? You think I'm actually afraid of you tattling? Do you actually think anyone in this house would take your side?" Two large men who looked like servants came over. "Young master, everything's smashed." "So fast?" the quacking youth questioned. "There wasn't much stuff in his broken shack anyway," the servant replied. The quacking youth was extremely pleased. He turned to Wei Wuxian, pointing so hard at the man that he was practically jabbing his finger up his nose and into his brain. "Go and tell on me, I dare you. Who are you playing dead for? As if anyone would actually give a crap about all this junk and waste paper. I've smashed everything. Let's see what else you've got to go tattle on me with. Think you're all that just because you went to a cultivation sect for a few years? Well, didn't you get kicked out like a stray dog anyway?" Presently half dead, Wei Wuxian thought to himself, "It's not pretend. I've actually been dead for many years." Who was this? Where was this? When had he ever done something like forcibly possess the body of another? After having kicked the man, ransacked the house, and spent all his temper, the quacking youth strutted out the door along with his two servants, slamming the door behind him. He ordered in a loud voice, "Keep proper watch. Don't let him come out to embarrass people." The servants outside the door all heeded. Once the man had gone, silence settled both inside and out of the house. Wei Wuxian wanted to sit up, but his limbs would not obey him, so he lay back down and flipped over. His head continued to spin as he looked at his strange surroundings and the mess on the floor. Next to him was a copper mirror that had been tossed onto the ground, and Wei Wuxian snatched it up. A dreadfully pale face appeared in the mirror. Two large blots of red were smeared unevenly on each cheek. If he were to stick out a long and vividly red tongue, then he'd be the very picture of a hanged ghost. Wei Wuxian tossed the mirror aside, a little disgusted. He wiped his face and found his hand smeared with white powder. Fortunately, it wasn't that this body had been born strange, but rather the penchant of the previous owner. A full-grown man with a face heavily caked in makeup, and sloppily applied at that. This shot some energy back into Wei Wuxian, who was finally able to sit up. Only then did he notice the circle of a spell array beneath him. The array was scarlet and crooked, seemingly hand-drawn using blood as the medium. It was still damp, emitting a metallic stench. There were warped and crazed spells drawn within the array that had been somewhat smudged by his body, but the remaining shapes and characters were gruesome in their evil intent. Wei Wuxian had been called by titles such as the Supreme Evil Lord, the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, and what not for years. So naturally, he was very familiar with obviously devious arrays such as these. It wasn't that he had robbed anyone of their body. He had been offered one. The nature of this sacrificial ritual was a type of curse. The caster was to harm themselves with a weapon, making cuts on their body and using their own blood to draw the array and write the spells within. They would then sit in the center of the circle and give up their mortal body to evil spirits, using the annihilation of their soul as the price to summon a nefarious, malicious ghost. This was all done to request the fulfillment of a wish. Thus, it was the opposite of possession. While both were forbidden magics of ill repute, the difference was that the former was much less popular than the latter. After all, few wishes were so strongly desired as to make someone willingly sacrifice everything they had. This was why the technique had been nearly lost after centuries of disuse. The examples recorded in ancient books had only a handful of cases that were backed by reliable evidence, and every single one of them had been for revenge. Every malicious ghost summoned by the ritual had fulfilled the caster's wishes perfectly, in cruel and bloody ways. Wei Wuxian refused to accept this. Since when was he categorized as a nefarious malicious ghost? While he had a fairly poor reputation and died an extremely tragic death, he didn't haunt the living for one, and it never sought vengeance for two. He could swear there was not a single wandering ghost in this world who was more decent and honest than he. But the tough thing was the sacrificial ritual followed the will of the caster first and foremost. So it didn't matter how much he objected. He was already inside this body, which was a silent acknowledgement that both parties had formed a contract. He had to fulfill the wish of the caster, or the curse would rebound, destroying the possessor's primordial spirit and extinguishing it forever. Wei Wuxian yanked his sash loose and raised his arms to inspect them. Sure enough, both of his wrists had been slashed with a sharp tool, leaving them covered in criss-crossing lacerations. The bleeding had already stopped, but Wei Wuxian knew these were not normal injuries. If he didn't fulfill the caster's wish, then these wounds would be unable to heal, and they would worsen the longer this dragged on. If the deadline for fulfillment was missed, then he who had accepted this vessel would be ripped apart in both body and soul alike. He triple-checked that there was no mistake and cried, "This is ridiculous!" mentally 10 times before finally rising to his feet with difficulty, supporting himself against the wall. The house was certainly big, but it was empty and shabby. The bedding was emitting a sour smell. Who knew how many days had gone by since it was last changed? There was a bamboo basket for trash in the corner that had been kicked over earlier, and both trash and waste paper were strewn across the floor. Wei Wuxian noticed there seemed to be ink marks on the crumpled papers, so he picked one up in passing. He opened it to take a look, and sure enough, it was covered in words. He quickly went around to collect all the balls of paper. These were probably written by the owner of his body to vent his frustrations. Some of the sentences were incoherent and disordered, but the anxiety and nervousness were abundantly clear. Wei Wuxian patiently examined each sheet, and the more he looked, the more he felt something was amiss. Through some guesswork, he figured out a few things. First, the owner of this body was named Mo Xuanyu, and this place was called the Mo Estate. Mo Xuanyu's grandfather on his mother's side was from a rich family in this area. The family wasn't large, and the man was not fated for a son. After years of trying, he still only had 2 daughters. The name of the second daughter wasn't mentioned, but either way, the eldest daughter was born of the lawful wife. Thus, they were looking for a husband to marry into their family name. Although the second daughter was exceptional in appearance, she was born of a servant, which was why the Mo family had originally planned to marry her out without giving much thought to the groom. Who would have thought she was fated for a fortuitous encounter? When she was 16, the head of a prominent clan was passing by and fell in love with her at first sight. The two made the Mo manor the site of their rendezvous, and a year later, the second daughter gave birth to a son. This was Mo Xuanyu. The inhabitants of the Mo estate would normally have held such an event in contempt, but people at the time worshipped cultivators. In the eyes of the mundane folk, cultivation clans that pursued immortality were loved by the heavens, mysterious and noble. Furthermore, that prominent clan leader would financially support this new outer family branch of his every so often. So naturally, these circumstances were special. Not only did the Mo family consider this an honor, but others were extremely envious too. However, the good days did not last. That wandering clan leader was only hungry for the novelty of fresh meat, and he was over it after 2 years, coming to visit less and less frequently. After Mo Xuanyu turned 4, the man never appeared again. In those passing years, the Mo estate's opinion changed again. The contempt and mockery returned, now with added disdain and pity. Second Lady Mo refused to accept this, believing firmly that the prominent clan leader would not turn a blind eye to his own son. And sure enough, when Mo Xuanyu turned 14, that clan leader sent over a grand party to officially take him back. Second Lady Mo's head was held high again. Although she could not go with them, this event swept away all the grievances she had. Feeling proud and elevated, she proclaimed proudly to everyone she saw that her son would definitely become a leader of cultivation sects in the future, rise to the top, and bring glory to the ancestors. Thus, the people of the Mo estate changed their opinion for the 3rd time. However, Mo Xuanyu was driven out before he managed to cultivate acclaim and succeed his father, and driven out in the most shameful way. Mo Xuanyu was a cut sleeve, a male homosexual, and he was so audacious as to harass his fellow peers. With this scandal exposed, and the fact that he possessed only average talent and no real achievements in cultivation, the sect had no reason to keep him. Adding frost to snow, something had upset Mo Xuanyu. When he returned home, it was as a madman. His mental state had been upended, as if he had been scared silly. Having read to this point, Wei Wuxian's brow twitched a couple of times. The cut sleeve matter aside, the man was a lunatic too. No wonder he had smeared enough powder on his face to look like a hanged ghost. No wonder no one thought it was strange that there was such a large bloody spell array on the ground. Mo Xuanyu could probably smear blood all over this house, from the floor tiles, up the walls, and to the ceiling, and no one would think it weird, because everyone knew he was crazy. After Mo Xuanyu returned to his old home, he was bombarded with ridicule. This time, it seemed the situation was unsalvageable. Unable to take this blow, Second Lady Mo was choked to death by her own unappeasable outrage. At this time, Mo Xuanyu's grandfather had already passed, and the one managing the household was First Lady Mo. This Madame Mo had never been able to stand her little sister, and she scorned that sister's bastard son. She had a single son herself by the name of Mo Ziyuan, the one who had just attacked Mo Xuanyu's house. When Mo Xuanyu first left with such impressive fanfare, First Lady Mo had felt they now possessed something of a family tie to that prominent cultivation sect, and had hoped the cultivator envoys would bring Mo Ziyuan along with them too. Of course, she had been rejected, or rather, ignored. Duh, this wasn't like selling cabbage in the markets, buy one get one free. Who knew where this family got its confidence? But they all possessed a bizarre idea. They firmly believed that Mo Ziyuan had potential, that he had talent, and that if he were the one who had gone with the cultivators, then he would have been recognized for his worth for sure, unlike his failure of a cousin. Although Mo Ziyuan had been young when Mo Xuanyu left, he had been repeatedly indoctrinated to believe this nonsense without a single doubt. Thus, he caught Mo Xuanyu every other day to humiliate him, cursing him for having robbed him of his path to cultivation. Yet he remained enamored with the talismans, the pills, and the little spiritual devices that had been brought back from the cultivation sect, and would take them all for himself, breaking them as he willed. While Mo Xuanyu was often in the throes of madness, he knew when he was being humiliated. He tried his best to endure it time and again, but Mo Ziyuan's behavior only worsened, practically emptying the entire house. At last, Mo Xuanyu had enough. He finally stammered a complaint to his uncle and aunt, which was why Mo Ziyuan had come knocking today looking for trouble. The words on the paper were tiny and cramped. Wei Wuxian's eyes were sore from reading all this, and he thought to himself, what kind of hellish life was he fucking living? No wonder Mo Xuanyu had preferred to end it, offering his body to summon malicious ghosts to avenge himself. After his eyeballs started feeling better, it became his head's turn to ache. Technically, the caster of the ray had to mentally recite their wish. As the evil spirit summoned, Wei Wuxian should have been able to hear the details of his request. However, this forbidden magic had probably been secretly copied off a book with missing pages. It was incomplete, and Mo Xuanyu had missed that step. Although Wei Wuxian could guess that he most likely sought vengeance against the Mo family, how exactly did he want it done? To what extent? Take back what was taken? Beat up the family? Or wipe them out entirely? It was most likely wiping out the family, eh? After all, anyone who had been in the cultivation world would know the words most often used to describe Wei Wuxian. Treacherous, mad. Was there anyone who better fit the description of fiendish? Since the man had dared to summon him by name, his wish was definitely not something easily granted. Wei Wuxian said helplessly, "But you've got the wrong person." So that's the end of chapter 2 from the original serialization. So as I mentioned in my first read and react video on Mo Dao Zu Shi, or Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, I found the prologue's language very anglicized, and I was hoping that the novel will be able to capture some of the original novel's Chinese flavor. So what are my thoughts after reading chapter 2? First of all, the chapters are very long because they combined 4 chapters from the original serialization. I guess that's not a problem if you're just doing silent reading to yourself, but to read aloud, for example, if they do an official audiobook, it will make every chapter very long. This chapter was 44 pages long with 2 pages of illustrations. So that is really hefty, and I'm not really sure why they chose to combine the chapters this way. Second of all, I have to be really honest and say that the language and structure is very convoluted. They use a lot of big words, sometimes multiple big words in sentences. I'm not sure if this is faithful to the original Chinese text because I can't read the original Chinese. But the sentence structures are also very complicated. So I found that when I was doing silent reading for myself and when I was recording this video, I get tripped up by many sentences. I have to go back and read it maybe twice or 3 times before my mind can wrap itself around the sentences. So to be really honest, this is affecting my enjoyment of the novel. I don't mean this as an attack on the translator or the editor at all. This is really my own personal opinion as someone who does a lot of editing for my own professional work. I'm a little bit concerned about the vocabulary because there's a very prolific use of sesquipedalians. See, that wasn't that easy to understand, right? It just means they use a lot of big words. And the thing with big words is that they need to be chosen with care and used sparingly in order to have an effect. I will still continue reading it because I really love this story so much, and we'll see how it goes. If you enjoyed this video and if you have an opinion, please feel free to leave a comment below, but let's keep it civil because we're not here to attack anyone for their hard work. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you would like me to continue making these read and react videos. Till next time, take care and stay safe everyone. Bye.